Biography of Chief Massasoit, Native American hero. A leader at the crossroads. Before the United States existed, indigenous nations shaped the destiny of the land. Among them stood Wamsutta Metacom, Great Sachem of the Wampanoag people and a unifying leader of the Wampanoag Confederacy. His diplomacy protected his people and, ironically, enabled the survival of the very colonists who would soon reshape the continent forever. Massasoit's story is the story of first contact, cooperation, mistrust, survival, and lasting consequence. Origins of a leader, young Massasoit. Before the Pilgrims came, before Plymouth, before Thanksgiving became a national story, there was a thriving native world, the Wampanoag Nation. Stretching across what is now Massachusetts and Rhode Island, more than 60 villages formed a powerful confederacy rooted in balance, farming the land, harvesting the waters, and honoring the spirits of nature. At the center of this world rose Wamsutta, the man remembered as Massasoit, meaning Great Sachem, birth of a future leader, Sykesy, 1580. Born into the Wampanoag, the most influential band of the Wampanoag, Wamsutta grew up learning the responsibilities of leadership, seasonal migrations between coast and forest, fishing the rivers, hunting, diplomacy, and defending his people. From a young age, he showed what his people valued most: honor, wisdom, and calm strength. People of the first light. The Wampanoag saw the first sunrise over North America's shores, a maritime world defined by canoes, rivers, and the Atlantic coast. Trade connected them with neighboring tribes, the Nipmuc, the Massachusetts, and their greatest rivals, the Narragansett. This dangerous rivalry shaped Wamsutta's path to power. Strange visitors from the sea. As Wamsutta entered adulthood, new threats appeared offshore. European explorers searched for wealth, furs, fish, and sometimes slaves. Kidnappings devastated coastal families. Rumors spread that these strangers brought death. Wamsutta recognized that these encounters would shape the future. Becoming Great Sachem, Wamsutta joined the Council of Sagamores, leaders responsible for law, food security, diplomacy, and defense. He excelled in protecting his people, keeping order, and building unity. By his 30s, he had risen beyond local leadership. He was becoming the Great Sachem the Wampanoag would depend on. The silent disaster. In the early 1600s, with strong harvests and thriving villages, the Wampanoag seemed secure. Then, catastrophe struck. A mysterious plague, likely leptospirosis, spread along the coast. Fever and sores, rapid death. Entire villages abandoned. Up to 90% of Wampanoag people died in only a few years. Their strength was broken. Their old enemies, the Narragansett, were left untouched and ready to conquer. Wamsutta suddenly faced the greatest crisis his nation had ever known: defend what remained or watch his people disappear forever. The dawn of a new age. Strange ships soon returned to Wampanoag shores. The people on board were starving, sick, vulnerable. Wamsutta realized this moment would determine the fate of his world: resist the newcomers and face annihilation, or forge an alliance that might save his nation. The stage was set for history's most consequential decision, an alliance that would change America forever. The Great Dying and First Contact. Between 1616 and 1619, a devastating plague swept across Wampanoag lands. No enemy army marched. No war cry sounded. Death spread silently. People collapsed with fever and bleeding sores. Entire villages vanished in weeks. The Wampanoag Confederacy, once strong and united, was reduced to only a fraction of its former power. The Narragansett, untouched by the disease, now threatened to dominate the region. For the first time in generations, the Wampanoag were vulnerable. Survival demanded new strategies. The fate of the nation rested on the leadership of Wamsutta Metacom. Foreign sails returned. In December 1620, a European ship called the Mayflower anchored near Wampanoag waters. The newcomers, the Pilgrims, arrived in the harshest season. Half of them died before the spring thaw. They were weak, starving, and poorly prepared for the climate. The Wampanoag watched from a distance. These strangers might become either enemies or allies. Massasoit studied them carefully. A wounded foreign colony could become a dangerous one if it sought land through violence, but a partnership might bring weapons, goods, and a chance to balance power against the Narragansett. Massasoit made his first great strategic decision: observe, wait, and prepare. A message of peace. On March 16, 1621, a tall native man walked boldly into Plymouth Colony. His name was Samoset, a Sagamore from the east who had learned some English from fishermen. He told the colonists about the surrounding tribes, about the Wampanoag, and about their great leader, Massasoit. Soon after, Samoset returned with Tisquantum, known today as Squanto, a Wampanoag man who had previously been kidnapped by Europeans and gained knowledge of their ways and language. With Squanto as translator, Massasoit prepared to make contact. Every step was a risk. If the Pilgrims betrayed them, the Wampanoag, already weakened, could be destroyed. The Peace Treaty of 1621. On March 22, 1621, Massasoit and a group of Pokanoket warriors walked into Plymouth. With careful ceremony, they and the Pilgrims agreed to terms that would shape the new world. Neither side would harm the other. Stolen goods would be returned. Enemies of one would become enemies of both. Diplomacy would replace violence. This alliance created a 50-year peace, the longest period of cooperation between Native Americans and colonists in early American history. Massasoit had achieved what his ancestors had long sought: a protector against the Narragansett and access to powerful trade goods. Dependence and new realities. The Pilgrims depended on Massasoit's generosity. Squanto and Hobbamock taught them how to plant corn, find fish, and survive the unfamiliar land. Massasoit ensured they had food during their worst times. Without his support, Plymouth might have disappeared before its first year ended. But the alliance was fragile. Each new colonial hut built on Wampanoag land changed the balance. New settlers continued to arrive. The English population grew faster than the Wampanoags could recover. Massasoit saw the future approaching and knew it brought danger. A leader. Between two worlds. The Wampanoag depended on Massasoit's diplomacy to maintain peace and strength. The English depended on him for survival. This made him the most influential native leader in the region and placed enormous weight on every decision he made. He had walked the narrow line between preservation and accommodation. He had forged a peace that saved many lives. But peace came with a cost that the next generation would no longer accept. The alliance Massasoit created changed history. The conflict his sons would inherit would define it. The world was entering a new era, and the struggle for the land had just begun. The alliance tested loyalty, land, and power. 1621-1630. The new alliance shifted the balance of power across New England. With the Wampanoag and the English standing together, the Narragansett threat faded. For the first time since the plague, Massasoit's people could breathe again. But peace created new problems. Each passing year brought more English settlers, more farms, more fences, and less Wampanoag land. Massasoit worked constantly to prevent this relationship from turning into a conflict that his people could not win. The fragile friendship. Massasoit did everything in his power to maintain trust. He allowed missionaries and traders to travel freely. He intervened in disputes before they turned violent. He protected Squanto and Hobbamock as advisors. Yet tensions simmered beneath the surface. One misunderstanding, one crime, one spark could ignite war. Massasoit's diplomacy was the barrier holding back chaos. Squanto's divided loyalties. Squanto had his own ambitions. Using his language skills, he built relationships directly with English leaders. Some Wampanoag accused him of trying to replace Massasoit as Great Sachem. Rumors that Squanto conspired with the English spread quickly. Massasoit demanded Plymouth turn Squanto over for punishment. The Pilgrims refused. The alliance wavered. Only careful negotiation prevented bloodshed. This struggle showed how outside influence threatened traditional power. A great leader in crisis. The 1623 illness. In 1623, Massasoit became gravely ill. Plymouth leaders rushed to his village. Edward Winslow prepared medicine, cleaned infections, and stayed by the Sachem's side. Massasoit recovered, and everything changed. In gratitude, he renewed the alliance with deeper trust. He made a promise that the English would be treated as his own kin. The peace Massasoit had built, once fragile, became the strongest political bond in the region. The cost of peace. The English population grew rapidly through the 1620s. New arrivals meant forests cleared for farms, native hunting lands fenced off, English law enforced on native soil trade debts, forming economic dependence. Massasoit agreed to several land transfers, always trying to control and slow expansion. These decisions protected his people in the moment, but gradually weakened their future strength. The Wampanoag way of life was changing forever. Challenges from within and beyond. Some of Massasoit's own warriors questioned the alliance. Why help the colonists grow stronger? Why tolerate their claim to sacred land? Why bind Wampanoag destiny to foreigners? Meanwhile, the English no longer feared Wampanoag retaliation. Their power increased every year. What began as shared survival slowly turned into unequal control. Massasoit managed to keep peace, but peace no longer meant equality. A leader at the edge of change. By the end of the decade, Massasoit realized that his alliance, though successful, came with a heavy price. Dependence, loss of sovereignty, growing pressure from his own sons to resist. Massasoit's leadership protected the Wampanoag from destruction. Yet each year, the balance between his people and the English tilted further out of his favor. What kept the peace would one day fuel rebellion. What saved the Wampanoag would one day threaten their freedom. The balance cracks. Land, law, and rising tensions. 1630, 1650. The peace Massasoit worked so hard to build entered a dangerous new era. The arrival of over 20,000 Puritans during the Great Migration turned small colonies into a powerful English presence stretching across New England. More ships, more homes, more farmland, more pressure. The Wampanoag, still recovering from the plague, were now outnumbered in their own homeland. Massasoit remained committed to peace, but the terms of that peace were shifting. English expectations grew larger. Wampanoag freedoms grew smaller. Land disappears. One field at a time. English colonists saw land as individual property to own, fence, and buy. The Wampanoag saw land as communal, entrusted for future generations. This fundamental difference created conflicts everywhere. English towns spread into traditional hunting grounds. Sacred sites were claimed as colonial farmland. Native boundaries were ignored or reinterpreted. Written deeds replaced oral agreements. Massasoit negotiated land transfers carefully, choosing deals that protected his people from starvation and war. But each treaty reduced Wampanoag land and power forever. English law tightens its grip. English courts expanded jurisdiction over native people. Fines, punishments, and legal decisions were increasingly based on English customs, not Wampanoag traditions. The English believed their laws superior. The Wampanoag believed their sovereignty threatened. Disputes once solved by sachems now required colonial judges. Authority that had guided the land for centuries was slowly pushed aside. A kingdom united. Until now, Massasoit had held Wampanoag unity through shared trauma, plague, land loss, and fear of the Narragansett. But younger warriors, including his sons, questioned. Why submit to English rules? Why sign away lands piece by piece? Why trust a people who keep multiplying? They saw their father's alliance as a temporary survival tactic, one the English now twisted in their favor. Massasoit stood between generations, one that remembered the full strength of the Wampanoag and one that feared they would never regain it. Trading prosperity and dependence. Trade with Plymouth provided metal tools, cloth, and weapons, essential for defense against rival tribes. But reliance on English goods led to economic dependence. Traditional crafts lost value. Fur and land became the only bargaining chips. Debts forced more concessions. Every trade agreement strengthened colonial power. Massasoit recognized that without careful balance, commerce could become chains. The sons of Massasoit. His eldest son, Wamsutta, called Alexander by the English, and his second son, Metacom, later known as King Philip, grew into strong leaders under his guidance. But they differed from their father in one critical way. They never knew a world where the Wampanoag were free from English influence. They watched the treaty become a trap. They waited for the moment they could challenge it. Faith maintained, future in doubt. Massasoit continued to negotiate peace, believing coexistence remained possible. But by 1650, he could see a darker future forming. The English no longer needed Wampanoag protection. Their population soared, their ambitions expanded, their respect faded. Massasoit had prevented war, but he could not prevent colonial hunger for land. The peace he forged had saved his people from extinction, yet plant lasting peace, lasting tension. Massasoit's final years, 1650, 1661. By 1650, Massasoit had kept peace with the English for nearly 30 years, a remarkable achievement given the dramatic shifts in power. But beneath the surface of calm diplomacy, tensions pressed harder each year. The English population exploded, Wampanoag lands shrank, and the sons of Massasoit looked toward a future far more uncertain than the past their father had known. Massasoit stood as a bridge between worlds, a bridge beginning to crack under the weight of history, a leader holding the line. Massasoit continued to govern with wisdom and patience. He mediated conflicts between tribes. He negotiated boundaries and trade agreements. He ensured food and stability for the Wampanoag. But each negotiation came with compromise. Each compromise came with loss. And each loss fueled doubt among younger warriors. Massasoit believed diplomacy still offered the best chance for survival, but survival now required surrendering more than ever before. Spiritual roots, spiritual threats, Wampanoag spiritual traditions, the heartbeat of identity, faced new pressures. Puritan settlers pushed for Christian conversion. Missionaries challenged the Pawamas, spiritual leaders, and traditional beliefs. Sacred sites lost protection as colonial farms and churches expanded. For Massasoit, religion had once been separate from diplomacy. Now it became a front line of resistance. Massasoit's sons stepped forward. His sons, Wamsutta and Metacom, matured into leaders with vision and strength. They respected their father deeply, yet they saw a world where peace favored only one side. To them, diplomacy looked like slow defeat. They pressed Massasoit to confront the growing imbalance. Why continue giving land to English settlers? Why accept foreign courts and laws? Why trust a colony that no longer feared the Wampanoag? A new generation questioned old strategies, not out of rebellion, but out of survival. The English grew, bold confidence and ambition rose in the English colonies. Larger towns, stronger militias, expanding food supplies. Colonial courts assuming greater authority. What began as a fragile settlement was now a regional power. The English no longer needed Wampanoag protection, and they acted like it. Massasoit recognized a painful truth. The balance he had once controlled was gone. The burden of leadership. Massasoit had navigated plague, famine, rival tribes, and foreign invasion. He built peace during an era that could have destroyed his nation entirely. But leadership became lonelier as his people demanded answers. Why is our land still shrinking? Why must we obey foreign rules? How long must we bend before we break? Every year brought new doubts about the future, doubts Massasoit felt deeply. Yet he refused to let despair divide his people. Until his final breath, he held the Wampanoag together. The death of a great Sachem. Around 1661, Chief Massasoit passed away, and with him ended the time of peace he had shaped. His death symbolized the closing of a chapter, not only for the Wampanoag, but for all of New England. He left behind a nation still alive, a peace still intact, two sons determined to protect what remained. But without Massasoit's guidance and diplomacy, the alliance he forged with the English was vulnerable, and his sons would soon face a world far more hostile than the one he navigated. The peacekeeper was gone, the storm was coming. The final legacy of Massasoit's leadership would be tested in the fires of uprising, a conflict that would reshape the continent.